City Manager, are we almost ready to get started?
Moving on up.
Moving on up, that's right. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our budget session. Before I hand this over to our City Manager, I want to take a moment and put somebody on the spot because you're going to be seeing her with me quite a bit over the next year. So Miss Camille Pulver, who's back in the corner, if you can wave. So Miss Camille is a master's level social work student at Grand Valley State University, and she will be an intern in the mayor's office starting this week and going through the end of next April. So she'll be working with us on a number of projects, including the census and the greening initiative and the river cleanup, and then neighborhood summit. So she'll be engaged in a number of activities. Hopefully she'll have a chance to meet with all of you and city staff. You'll see her around, so please make sure you give her a warm welcome. I remind everyone that in the School of Social Work we do unpaid internships, so I try to be extra kind to our social work students who give a lot of their free time to every organization that they're placed in. So with that, I will turn it over to our city manager to kick us off on a full budget session that we have today. I know we want to take a break probably around 10:30, so hopefully we'll get through a few of the topics before then.
Good.
City manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, commissioners. Good morning. It's good to be back this week, and I want to thank you for your participation in our budget discussion so far. It has certainly been a privilege to work with you and for you in preparing our fiscal 20 plan. My appreciation continues for our staff that has worked so diligently and hard to get us to this point under the leadership of our CFO, Mr. Dode, and all of his budget personnel. I really appreciate their effort, and certainly we have another good team of professionals today that will share with you the remaining topics that we have not covered regarding the plan. Can we advance it to the next slide, please? So we did introduce the budget on the 23rd, and we had our session last week, and as we discussed, we shifted some of the topics for the 30th, and so that we could have the discussion today on economic prosperity, affordability, mobility, and safe community. We do intend to come back on the 14th, and there will be several other items for the Committee of the Whole on the 14th that will include some of the appropriations for the districts and authorities, as well as several other items and whatever questions that you might have for us. And of course, we'll hear from the public on that night, and then we anticipate adopting the budget either on the 21st, as early as the 21st, or as late as the 23rd if needed. What you will hear today is, next slide, is our team led by our Deputy City Manager, DeLong, will take us through some of the sections. We will pause today after each of the sections and take questions that you might have. Since we have budgeted, I think, our time until noon, we will pause after each section. So with that, I will now turn it over to Deputy City Manager Eric DeLong.
Thank you, City Manager Washington, and good morning, everyone. Today we're going to start with economic prosperity and affordability. So investments this year will provide a new focus on collaboration and innovation among internal and external partners. You can see that we have about $640,000 of new operating investments. About $360,000 of those are in the general fund. Another $280,000 of those are in non-general fund positions or non-general fund operations. There are 4 new positions proposed, and there are new capital investments of $2.15 million. So as I said, the intent is to work across the organization with a focus on an innovation lens, and that lens is going to help us solve very difficult problems, city problems, by creating synergy between entrepreneurs within our organization and entrepreneurs on the outside of our organization that exist within the community and are anxious to be engaged. One example that we'll do this year is to work within the organization to create alignment of the micro-local business function with the Economic Development Department and also external partners in a way that expands the circle of participants in that function. And so to talk about operating investments, Managing Director Carol Wood will take us through those.
Okay, new investments in this initiative area include creation of a full-time business ombudsperson at the Development Center to assist small businesses and other applicants through the permitting and approval process. This is based on a successful pilot program as suggested by the Grand Rapids Chamber Ease of Doing Business Survey. In addition, under driving business retention and growth, we envisioned two investments here. Retail recruitment and retention involves forging a creative alliance with Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc. and the Grand Rapids Chamber to drive increased retail recruitment and retention across the city's business districts with the goal of increasing occupancy rates of commercial real estate. And this is a direct result of your strategic plan. In addition to admin analyst positions in planning to provide capacity for medical marijuana processing, community planning, engagement on vital streets projects, age-friendly work, and the start of the master plan. In addition, under facilitating affordable housing development, a housing practice leader that will develop, execute, and lead a comprehensive strategy around housing throughout city departments. And under the area of making Grand Rapids a destination city, we have assigned an existing civil engineer to support the city's role in river restoration under the memorandum of understanding with Grand Rapids Whitewater and the pending memorandum of agreement with our federal partners. The responsibilities of this position include assisting the team with permitting, project management, and implementation. The position will be backfilled in order to allow the person's prior duties in stormwater permitting, land use and development, and inspections to be completed.
So the capital investments under this, under economic prosperity and affordability, include investing in restroom facilities with partners in the Hartside District to work to solve that problem that has been with us for a while. Then phase two of the portion of the Lion Square restoration project, which will augment the investment that's already been approved for the waterfront area. This will take care of the plaza portion. Then we'll be investing in that with partners as well. That cost is about $1.4 million for the second phase. And then the next phase is the city's commitment to river restoration. So last year we budgeted for the first investment, and this year will be the second installment. We have more installments in the river restoration as we go forward. So this year is $700,000, and then it'll be $700,000 for the next several years. And then in the last year of the budget, there will be a $300,000 investment. So those are the investments, and they can be found on the capital investments can be found on pages 126 through 128 of the budget. So this was a relatively brief section, and so we're available for any questions you might have about this.
And Commissioners, so our intent, we previewed much of this on the 23rd. We went to a little bit more detail today, and so today is really about answering whatever questions you might have about the proposal.
All right, Commissioners, questions? I'll start it off, maybe going back to the investment by initiative area, the two related to resilient business environment and driving business retention. I'm curious, with these additional supports, what are we going to do differently, and how are we going to? Can you just elaborate a little bit more on maybe some of the impacts we'll see in relation to the retail recruitment and retention?
Good.
Like, what do you envision for that? What will it look like? How will your department be involved? You know, will businesses in the SIDS and downtown feel a difference from the city? I'm just curious what that will look like.
So the expectation is that we'll work with partners to develop the program. And it won't necessarily be led by the city, but be based in community and led potentially by other partners. But yes, the Corridor Improvement District authorities will participate at some level in the future. And this will be a unique approach that we may not have taken before. So with the goal of reducing retail vacancy rates, understanding that we have an opportunity to fill these spaces with viable retail options. But we don't want to predetermine what that process actually looks like until we work with our partners. But it would be very different than what we're experiencing today.
Might I add, in addition to what Director Wood has said, we thought of this because the Right Place does a fantastic job of recruiting for the region. And so while they focus on large manufacturers and industrial employers, there is an opportunity to focus on business recruitment and retention specifically for Grand Rapids, which is not their, as you are aware, which is not their sole focus. And so what we are looking at is that with the opportunities of the retail vacancies, both in the downtown area as well as throughout the community, to be more aggressive in seeking and developing small businesses, either within businesses who want to grow and expand within our community, or go to other areas of our state in our region for businesses that want to expand, to come to Grand Rapids and offer them an opportunity. And so this is something, as Ms. Wood said, we will not be able to do by ourselves, and we want to partner with the chamber, the business chamber, as well as DGRI initially to kind of scope out what this program might look like, so that we can be aggressive. And then, yes, there will be opportunities for expansion, because we want it to be inclusive of our entire community and not just the downtown area. But initially, my conversations with this business development program has been with the chamber. I don't think that we will have the person on our payroll. We will contribute towards some type of effort along with DGRI as well as the chamber and the chambers, but I think they will have more flexibility to do business development than going through our traditional processes. And so we just want to see if we can experiment a little bit and have some good outcomes. I think reasonably, not to set unrealistic expectations, we have talked about what a year from now might look like in terms of the number of businesses that would be developed as a result of this, and we've had some preliminary conversations on the number, but I don't think we've agreed on that outcome yet.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Kelly?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, when we first went through this, in the original packet, I had a big yes next to this, and the reason for that is I have been hearing since I've been on the commission, from our small businesses in the neighborhoods, how they are eager for some assistance. We do have access to good data on leakage, and yet they don't have these small neighborhood association groups and small business association groups outside of even the SID, not to mention the SIDs, do not have the capacity to take the time to really dig into that, much less do any marketing. And many of them recall years ago when we did have support for neighborhood businesses, and that went through the chamber, and then that money dried up and disappeared. And so they've been, I wouldn't say floundering, they've done a great job, but nevertheless it's been one program after another. For a while they had SID support from one organization, and then that fell off. So as we look at where we're going in the future, I would like to see us involve especially those small business associations, and then of course contact local first to see what we can do with them. Really look at leakage, help them understand what it is they need to do to recruit. Not that they have the staff and the capacity, but I recall in Uptown we had a couple of individuals who really did a great job of going out on their own, but that was all volunteer, and you can't sustain that kind of thing. And then of course we also have concerns that we have heard loud and clear from the SIDs, certainly in my ward, in the 3rd Ward, where Uptown spans, that we've lost some of our minority businesses. And again, it's a matter of capacity and understanding how to get out there and recruit and retain those businesses. And unless we work, I think, closely with the chamber, I just don't see that happening. So I'm excited to see this, and just really encourage the chamber and downtown to include those small district associations like Easttown's Business Association, Wealthy Street Business Alliance, those all over the city that you all can name better than I, to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, good point. Commissioner?
Thank you, City Manager, and to the presenters. And thanks for the green sheet so that we can distinguish this one from the others. I have a quick question. So the business ombudsperson, excuse me, Commissioner Kelly is absolutely right. I think that this is going to be really impactful for the city to serve the business community in this way. My only question is to really kind of have a history lesson here. About 3 years ago, when we were having a very similar discussion as we were looking at a budget, we talked about the creation of a position like this. And we also talked about that position also having the responsibility of coordinating the SIDS and bids at the time. And I distinctly remember it because we had a retirement at the time. It was Alex Thomas who was retiring. And I was suggesting that with the function that he had and with the creation of this new position, that there would be some synergy. And I also remember us having a very robust discussion about the responsibilities of that new position, so that we would all be clear, and let's hold off on trying to hire the position and filling the position until we were all on the same page. So we got to a point where it was posted and filled, and then this component of the work never came to fruition, although that was the intent. And that was probably 3 years ago, and I could have the wrong year, but those of you who spend time on this daily will know. And so to create another position because we didn't fulfill what we had committed to doing 3 years ago gives me pause, because I look at it and I think, we have to be more strategic as we're utilizing public dollars for positions, and we have to be more efficient in how we spend those dollars and when we're hiring, and making sure that people who are in those positions are fulfilling those obligations. And I think we intentionally chose not to do that for that position and the person who was in the position when it was created, which was a frustration for many of us who remembered that that was the intent. So I guess I'm asking the question now, so why aren't we putting this responsibility back into the position that was created 3 years ago? I know you weren't in the seat that you're in now, but I know we've had brief conversations about this, so that we don't have to create a new position to do what we had already allocated dollars in a position to do 3 years ago.
So that historical reference is helpful. And let me just, by way of clarification, just the business ombudsperson is an actual position that is doing the work in the planning department right now, assisting people through the permitting process.
Okay.
That's happening. That's a temporary position. Matter of fact, we were doing business visits and tours. I see our chamber CEO has just walked in, and we went to the development center to see the person that's there doing the work, but they're temporarily there now. So we want to make that permanent so we can market that position to everyone who's trying to go through the development process, and they're a small business, or maybe they haven't been through the process before. But I think we can be more aggressive in making that opportunity known. It's been based on referral, that their assistance. So I think what I understood from our Director Schultz was that they were a little concerned about marketing something that they didn't know was going to be sustainable in a temporary person. The other opportunity for assisting in business development and recruitment outside of the permitting process is not a position that we will have on the payroll, but it will be an investment in a function. I think DGRI will probably embody or house the position on their payroll, but we're still working out the particulars. As to what our commitment was in the past and why things may have not been realized as promised, I will have to defer to the staff if that's known. If not, if we need to get back with the commission, we certainly can.
I can start, and we can always fill in later. So Commissioner, thank you for bringing that up. And when we formed the position, it was to partly we were hoping to do development, business development. We also wanted to also organize the SIDS and have the SIDS take care of the administrative portion of having a SID, so minutes, agendas, getting people organized, that kind of stuff. And we've gone through a remarkable growth in the number of our SIDs, so we're up to six now. And so I think we underestimated, in my estimation, we underestimated the body of work having to do with that organizational work. And that's precluded us from doing as much development work as we would have liked to have done. So I think that we have 5 of the 6 SIDs now are pretty well organized. We have one that's still relatively new that's just getting their plan approved. And I think that we're building supports now where this position, the one that we previously approved, I think we'll be able to morph into additional work. So in addition to keeping the SIDS functioning well, we'll be able to help coordinate work that happens within the SIDS. And some of the SIDS are actually getting their own corridor managers, which also will help free up some of the time of this person to do more development work. So I think the ultimate end stage here will be a more supportive environment for retail development in our corridor improvement districts that will involve a team that includes the investment that we're talking about today, the $100,000 for the partnership, the business ombudsperson, which will help persons through the development process, and then the corridor manager as well, or the person that we have working with the SIDS in the Economic Development Office.
Thank you.
Commissioner O'Connor, I see your hand too. Going back to that, because I recall asking the same question, and I think Eric is right. One, the increase in the number of SIDS, but about a year ago, the state made some changes to the law requiring additional reporting and accountability for all corridor improvements or TIF districts. And I know that we had staff go around and educate the SIDS and the DDA about what those requirements are. My understanding is we need to make sure that that person is doing the administrative work to make sure that we're in compliance with state law. And that added some additional work to that position. Is that accurate?
Yep.
Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. Yes.
So it just sounds like another example of communication. You know, I think because it's challenging to see a position or see dollars allocated for such, for something that we've already approved a position to do. And I think, I also know that sometimes we're not as efficient in how we do workflow internally. And so, you know, I don't know if there's room to not have the person do all of the administrative work. You know, if there's administrative support someplace else where some of those functions, like meeting minutes and agenda creations, those are things that potentially could go to someone in an administrative position that could support the role. But I just want to make sure that we're aware of what we committed to 3 years ago, and the fact that we're now looking at this allocation is something I think we should consider. The other thing is, City Manager, and I know you were just probably casually mentioning this, but if DGRI, who has the goal and commitment to make sure the downtown is awesome, is where you're planning to house the dollars or place the dollars or allocate the dollars, I think that's going to give pause to the neighborhood business districts like the SIDS and BIDS, because DGRI is limited in how far they can go. And we frequently hear, because of those limitations, that, you know, they can't fund specific things. And I wouldn't want that decision to come back and then have a challenge later for neighborhood businesses being able to access the expertise that we're looking for. If it was housed in the chamber before, potentially maybe we could look at that as an option for citywide usage.
Yep, that's a good point. So we've actually talked through that, Commissioner, and perhaps I didn't do a good job in explaining the potential partnership. We have no agreement yet. We're still working through the details. So we're all co-investors, equal co-investors, the city, DGRI, and the chamber. From a payroll perspective, I think it will not be solely funded by GGRI, because that, you're right, that would limit it. I think the position will be partly funded so that they can do work both in the downtown area as well as outside of downtown. But we actually thought through that accessibility and the perception, and I think the chamber has offered to offer a space in their facility to have it. I'm agnostic really to it doesn't have to be in City Hall. I really want it to be in the best place that's going to get the best outcome.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I think what's different is we are going to have, based on our new strategic plan and performance management approach, at the end of the year, you will, regardless of how it's managed internally, we will want to see actual outcomes of new businesses that we can attribute to this program. And again, I hesitate, we have a number we've been talking about of actual new businesses, what we would set as performance goals for this function in person, but because we have not agreed upon that yet, I don't want to prematurely commit to that number.
Commissioner O'Connor, did you have a?
Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm very excited about both these positions, actually. City Manager Washington and I have talked several times about both of them, and the idea of the business ombudsman, I think, is great. It's someone who's been through the process a couple of times. It's for a small startup business, I think there's a lot of touch points you have to have with the city and various departments and ways in which you interact, and so it can be very intimidating for someone who's not done that process before, and you get close to the end and you forgot to do something because you didn't have a fancy lawyer or a expensive architect to help you. So it's I think this is going to be a very, very important step in ensuring that kind of breaking down a barrier to entry to someone who might have a dream or a desire to want to participate but just doesn't. It's a very intimidating process to walk into 1120 Monroe and try to figure out how to get to success. So that's spectacular. The other idea around recruitment and retention, I think, is really amazing as well. I think we do a great job in Grand Rapids of catching things. We're a cool city. Everybody wants to be here, but it's I don't think we've done that very proactive outreach to grab things. I mean, Ruth mentioned, Commissioner Kelly mentioned the leakage study, but I think in the changing dynamics of the retail world, we see a lot of new development with vacant retail in the main floor because it's hard. And but we also see in our traditional business districts, some have very low vacancy rates, but even in those districts, there's still buildings that are underutilized or underdeveloped or that haven't been redeveloped or missing teeth within our business corridors. And so, I think part of at least my hope for this position is not just an interaction with our friends at the chamber and our friends at DGRI, but kind of an intentional analysis of what exists in our neighborhood business districts, what exists in our downtown, and what could potentially be logical business types that can go into those spaces, and then doing that more proactive, look out into neighboring communities, other municipalities around the state to say, hey, we don't have X in Grand Rapids, here's a few spaces. This is how we get to filling those voids, in growing that. So I hope that part of that recruitment and retention really is a recruitment of seeing who's winning in other places and inviting them, and then hopefully making it easy once we invite them here to get them through the process.
Yeah, well, and I'll add two things. So the ombudsman, as we said last year in our budget, we approved temporary funding for that, and that was in response to feedback from the community. So there was a survey that was done that was very clear that, as you said, Commissioner O'Connor, folks who were new to the community, who lacked experience, lacked relationships, they had a difficult time getting through the permitting and planning process. Where if you are from Grand Rapids and you have the relationships and you know who to call, it's a whole lot easier, and we want to make sure that that's not a barrier. And I know I see Mr. Canfield out there, and he has been instrumental in really looking at ways to be more welcoming, but also helping businesses and needing the support to do that internally, and to have this ombudsman position will help him do that. And then secondly, I agree with you, Commissioner O'Connor. I think the recruitment and retention is really critical. I know even Commissioner Jones and I heard from a gentleman several months ago from Chicago who really wanted to move to Grand Rapids and open up a business. He has one. He has actually a couple in Chicago, and came here multiple times and just could not find a good fit. Wasn't clear where to go. Reached out to a couple folks and just was not able to find a good match or even feel supported an opening here in Grand Rapids. And I think there's significant opportunity to help kind of create that experience and be more welcoming to folks, especially who are not from our community and who are walking in without relationships. So,
Yeah, two things,
Commissioner?
Mayor, yes. Regarding the business ombuds person, I think that it would be, my hope is that this sounds like a very authentic effort to work collaboratively with other entities in our city who have a similar desire to see businesses developed. To the point made by my colleague, Commissioner Kelly, I do think it's wise to make sure that we're doing all that we can within the neighborhood business districts to grow those areas. But also, I want to suggest that there's be an opportunity to practice perhaps, I guess what I would call a form of targeted universalism, where we can hone in on businesses that are created or developed by historically marginalized populations. And so I think that is, what Commissioner O'Connor said in many ways, that accentuates it, that when you're talking about the ability to navigate the rather somewhat tricky terrain with regards to starting a business, I think it's amplified even more when you consider certain communities and their efforts to try to develop business in our city. And so I'd be hopeful that that would be at the top of the list in terms of discussing strategy for this role and the efforts to grow business in our city. The other thing I want to make mention of is I'm very happy to see the inclusion of the housing practice leader in this portion as well. I think that a lot can be said about trying to operate with tremendous foresight, seeing that we have the land bank sunsetting and wanting to be very proactive in doing all that we can to keep affordable housing a priority. And again, hopefully this individual would be someone who is just, working day and night to find opportunities to, very strategic opportunities to create access and more opportunities to build and sustain affordable housing in our city. And the greater hope would be that we can pull in our brothers and sisters from Kent County to be part of the discussion and part of the work as well. So, thank you.
And then your strategic plan.
Yeah.
I just have just one question for Ms. Wood. And it's related to this business retention and growth. Last week you talked a bit about that loan collateral support program, so I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that and how that might help the things that we're talking about.
So you're speaking of the Third Ward Equity Fund, and that's the loan collateralization program that's only available in the Third Ward. So that
Okay.
will definitely support this work, and
Okay.
will hopefully provide opportunity for retailers to locate in the Third Ward.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any final questions? All right, I'll turn it back over to our city Did you have another question, Commissioner?
Well, no, I guess I just want to ask a question. I like this title of housing practice leader. I'm very in favor of that being in here. Will that be embedded in economic development? Or will it be in community development? Where will it be?
Or maybe in the city manager's office.
Right. I think, so I think initially, kind of similar to the business development and recruitment specialist, how we're going to seek to contract for a person to do that. That's our thought with that, and I think we'll initiate the service out of the executive office so they can be coordinating around all the various departments, but certainly we want them to work very closely with economic development, planning, and community development as well, as we bring that together.
Yeah, I just want to make note now. I've heard both Commissioner Lanier and I heard from the neighborhood associations. They would love to speak into that process of hiring that person, as well as the nonprofit housing developers. But I do like that it's a housing practice leader, whereas even though the goal is to increase affordability, I think that this person having a higher level view of housing is going to be important.
Agreed. All right, any final questions? All right, I'll turn it back to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's move on then to mobility. And in mobility this year, if I can turn the page, we have investments of 2.1 million in operations, and then we have one new position. And we have capital investments of 21.3 million, and of those, $4.5 million are within the neighborhoods of focus. So now to talk about some investments. So the first is to invest in a full year of Dash Circulator, Route 19, and Silver Line service, and also to for some bus shelter improvements. And then to drive mobility options, want to invest in a transportation planner aide, and that aide person would be a position that would help implement things like we'll talk in a little bit about the snow plowing, sidewalk snow plowing pilot. Will help with that. Will help with trying to get ahead of e-scooters, all bike share, car share, all the innovative things that we're doing, making sure that implementation is done very well. Capital investments are significant in this section.
Eric, can I ask a question about that? And maybe this is more appropriate for Josh. I've heard lots about e-scooters. In fact, as you know, there's lots of chatter throughout cities about that. Where are we right now? I know that there's companies looking at Grand Rapids. Are we being proactive about that, making sure that we're thinking through process and some rules so that we address some of the safety issues that have come up in other cities?
Are you asking when the bird is going to land?
Well, kinda, but I've not heard anything definitive, and I've not heard from our perspective where we are. So I'm curious time-wise.
So starting
Yes, when is the bird landing?
So we had kind of pushed pause a little bit so we could finish the city strategic planning work and go through the budget process. One of the upcoming items in the weeks to come, we've been working with the city manager on the bike plan to have that completed, because the city commission had been very clear to complete the plan first before moving forward with some of those other initiatives. And then we've discussed internally doing more of a request for proposals process to look for bike share and for scooters, but being very mindful that there's a lot of work to be done with the neighborhoods, as well as the community, or the corridor improvement authorities, as well as downtown, and how a process like that would go. So the idea is that we're still trying to be very thoughtful and intentional about that, but there are a lot of other things that we were kind of moving forward to get through the budget process. But we hope to be working through that with the city manager in the weeks to come.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. Good, thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, so now on to capital investments in this section. So we just talked a little bit about multimodal transportation. E-scooters qualify as multimodal, but we'll also be replacing 2 Dash vehicles this year to keep our fleet in good shape. We'll be adding 50 bus shelters as part of the second year of investment in the bus shelter program. We will invest $1 million in capital replacement of capital investment in capital parking projects that could produce with bonding up to 500 new spaces within the city, depending on if we can move those projects forward. Then other investments you see there have to do with parking asset management, keeping our current ramps in good shape, doing a lot of work around sidewalk investment and ADA investment, and then vital streets investments. And we'll talk about those in more detail in the sections that follow. So the budgets for these, you can see, are on a variety of pages within the budget. They're highlighted on this slide, and you have the slide in front of you, so I won't recite those. So the mobile GR Director, Josh Naramore, and Assistant City Engineer, Rick DeVries, will discuss capital investments. We'll start with Josh. But before, remember that we talked last week about $71 million of location-specific capital investments being done in this year's budget. And of that, $25 million being in neighborhoods of focus. And again, in mobility, 4.5 of $21 million are in neighborhoods of focus. And as we go through this fiscal year, we'll continue to refine and expand the use of the equity tool. Mr. DeVries will talk a little bit about his application of it, so you'll have some more detail on that. And we'll also, through the year, establish processes and metrics to more effectively track what we're doing in that regard. So with that, I give you Mr. Naramore.
Thank you, Deputy City Manager DeLong. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, and City Manager Washington. So the first item that we were wanting to highlight, as Mr. DeLong mentioned, was the city will be embarking on investing in a pilot program for sidewalk snow removal. This last winter, I think, proved to be really difficult for accessibility for seniors, people with disabilities, school children, and other folks that are trying to navigate our community. So this pilot program would be a $100,000 cost from the Major and Local Streets Fund. The pilot will demonstrate the feasibility of sidewalk snowplow and provide information about cost and level of service if that was to be expanded elsewhere throughout the community. 3 test areas would be identified, 1 in each ward, and will be determined based on the proximity to senior housing, safe routes to schools, high pedestrian use locations, and bus corridors. We're going to be looking for innovative ways to accomplish this through a competitive process. And this will be a collaboration between our department, Public Works, and Engineering, and the Sidewalks Division of Engineering. This is a map of the next 5 years of recommended locations for bus stop shelter improvements. This represents approximately 200 locations, and we are targeting to invest in up to 50 locations in fiscal year 20. So similar to Vital Streets, we are really looking for balance and distribution of the shelters over the course of the 5-year capital program. This leads to an averaging of about 40 stops per year. It's approximately 200 stops over the course of the program. The table here, just to show everyone, is that each shelter includes basic amenities such as solar-powered LED lighting, an in-shelter bench, and an advertising panel, and then also a trash receptacle. There is some overhead for doing this, including concrete work, trash collection, snow removal, and the cleaning of the stops themselves. The table here shows that we're striving for balance and distribution across each of the 3 wards, and 56% of the shelter investments over 5 years will be in the neighborhoods of focus. The process used for this was really initially a very sophisticated selection process. It was sorting all the stops by their proximity to schools and medical facilities, the boardings and lightings, ADA and senior boarding, census and demographic data. However, staff has simplified this to yield nearly the same locations using criteria such as all of this funding is for stop locations that are outside of the Downtown Development Authority boundary. They are all out in the neighborhoods. Not at a Silver Line stop if there is not an existing shelter. Not on the Route 19 project because we're still waiting for some of those stops to fully stabilize as that pilot project moves forward, making sure that all the stop locations are within the city limits and that there is at least 5 or more average daily boardings. This resulted in us identifying 344 stops of almost 1,000 bus stops within the city limits, and then we've targeted the top 200 locations for investment. And then I would just also like to point out that we're also really focusing on the maintenance of these stops, so once they're put out in the community, and redefining service levels and distribution of work with the RAPID is currently underway. And we'll be looking for collaboration options to complete this work, including winter snow removal. The next is capital investments for possible parking expansion. So overall, the outlook for delivery of new parking supply includes 300 leased spaces that will be coming online this fall as part of the Studio Park Celebration Cinema development, and up to another 500 ramped parking spaces and 2 new proposed facilities that could be constructed if projects are approved. The first construction project is adjacent to the Ottawa Fulton parking garage, and it's known as the Wedge. I just wanted to point out that in Objective 3 of the city strategic plan under the mobility pillar is a strategy to develop future-proofed parking developments, including parking facilities that can convert to other uses. This project itself, it would add an additional 165 spaces, and it would be built such that the building would have flat floors and could be converted from the 5 floors of parking into future office use. The project also includes ground floor retail and has the ability for development to be constructed, for private development to be constructed on top of the parking. The cost is approximately $12 million, but it would net income from the retail space on the ground floor and the air rights for the development on top of the garage. And also there is residual value because the facility can be repurposed because of the flat floor design. And it can be delivered in a variety of different ways with public-private partnerships.
Josh, in relation to the wedge, which I know we've talked about a number of times in the past, what is the process and plan for that? Are we doing a RFP? Is that going to happen this year?
It can happen in a variety of ways, but we had proposed to do that through a request for proposals process through the Economic Development Department.
Okay.
And we have all of that work done. We're just waiting to get through the budget process and for timing with some other initiatives. It's just working up the work plan in terms of, we had to complete the city strategic plan and the budget process, and then we could be ready as soon as the commission and the city manager give us the go-ahead.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
The next possible parking expansion area is adjacent to the downtown Ryerson Public Library, the surface lot there. And as many of you recall, we developed 4 potential concepts for what could happen on the site to activate that, to protect the historic integrity of the Ryerson Public Library itself, but also to allow for different types of building scenarios. This would activate the northeast side of downtown, and approximately would offer between 250 and 360 parking spaces, and the cost range just for the parking is $12 to $15 million. Any of the amenities that are shown in those depictions would be extra.
Do you have a question?
Okay.
I'll ask it again.
Okay.
So another thing that we wanted to highlight is during this budget presentation is, if you recall, there was a discussion last fall about parking fees and rates, expanded hours of meter enforcement, and other initiatives. City Manager Washington, when he came on board, asked staff to pause these efforts while we complete the Equitable Economic Development and Mobility Strategic Plan, which includes a parking master plan to better define what our parking priorities are. And this includes a detailed parking operational assessment. The 2018 parking fees remain in effect and have not been changed. They are not included in the omnibus fee resolution process, and a separate rate methodology was developed. And this is very similar to other enterprise departments such as water, sewer, and the duct rates. To be responsive to the evolving needs of the system, we would like to propose adding one new rate and amending another to address emerging matters in the community. The one new rate proposed for implementation is implementing a provision in the Grand Rapids Forward and River Plan that was subsequently included in relating zoning code amendments. So the Planning Department has received a request for exceeding the parking maximum as adopted as part of the GR Forward plan. And as part of this, it was called for in GR Forward for staff to develop a fee for the developer to pay for exceeding the maximum parking rate. So staff has proposed a fee schedule by zone district, which is before you today. And this is for a development that is coming in front of the Planning Commission later this week.
Josh, you might want to clarify that it's the parking max, not the rate. So
Yes.
it's a,
Yeah, why is this confusing? Can you explain that again? I'm sorry.
So under the current zoning ordinance, you can exceed so you propose your project based on the allowable use. You go to a table and that tells you how much parking you can build. You're allowed to go 20% above and beyond that by approval. If you want to exceed that 20%, GR Forward and the zoning recommendations were you had to pay a fee for each space you went above the 20% maximum. So if hypothetically your table says that you can only build 58 spaces, 20% above that would be 70 spaces, and if your project is proposing to build 226 spaces, you would be 156 spaces above the parking maximum. And based on which zone district you are in, you would have to pay a fee per each of those spaces that you are exceeding the parking maximum.
and I would add that it's a one-time fee.
Yes.
So paid at the time of development as part of the approval process.
So we're wrestling with 2 outcomes. One is the need to improve parking accessibility, and this is a way to do it within private development. The other is doing it in a responsible way where we don't encourage overdevelopment of just parking. And so the important part is the determination what is the appropriate fee level. And I don't think that discussion has been had until today, and this is the recommendation from staff.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
So how do you see the interplay of this between our existing parking minimum requirements then, especially in the context of having seen a variety of development projects now come and ask for a waiver of the minimum parking requirements?
So this is separate to the other provision that's allowed in the zoning code, which is the payment in lieu of parking, which is another thing that's allowed. That rate has also not been set, which is something that we have planned as part of the parking master plan. So that would actually be a question that I would probably have more for Planning Director Schultz. But the way we've seen them is it depends on where they are located by zone district. This is one in which the fees that we have proposed are more to understand that if you're overbuilding, there is going to be an impact to the adjacency. And if it's not available for full public parking or whatever the use is associated with it versus getting waivers for reducing parking, which is allowed based on, is it transit accessible? Are there other things that they can do in terms of meeting the waiver requirements in the zoning code?
So it's kind of an anomaly because most investors want to build the least parking they can and still support their business. And I think this is here for those businesses that have a particular need for a particular business need for their own parking that exceeds our zoning max.
Do you have examples of where this came to fruition or where we've seen this play out?
In the city or in the world?
In the city?
Yeah, in Grand Rapids.
I mean, big box retail on 28th Street, maybe? Like, is that? I mean, it seems
Those,
like the
I mean,
most.
those are relics, I think, of over parking of the past.
Right.
So I don't think those are comparable. I don't know of a situation where someone has wanted to build more parking than we have allowed. So this is the first instance under this new ordinance, which is why we're asking your indulgence to consider this rate.
Can I ask one follow-up question? But let's say a proposal did come forward where, let's say they really only need 58 and they want to build 300. Wouldn't that be, I mean, potentially the planning department could deny that request, knowing that we don't want these standalone massive parking structures in the middle of our neighborhoods. I mean, I think that was the big concern even brought up in Noble, right? That there was a initial proposal to build a 8-story parking ramp in the middle of the neighborhood, and the neighbors were unhappy, rightfully so, about that proposal. My guess is that the planning department still would take that under consideration and potentially would deny that request. Is that not accurate?
Let's ask Ms. Schultz to come and address that question.
I'll steal Doug's seat. They can. It's a special land use. The parking max is a special land use request in addition to the fee. So the Planning Commission does review it and does have the ability to approve or deny. This fee is really viewed as mitigation, as we're talking about trying to get mode shift. How do we do that? If a developer wants to provide more parking than what's required, we want to be able to accommodate their business. But we also want to be able to try to turn that needle a little bit and get some more mode shift so that we're accommodating everyone in all different ways so that over time, hopefully, we're not as parking dependent.
Mayor?
All right, Commissioner.
A question then, Suzanne, would that also, would you also take into consideration the design of the structure to include flat floors so that it can be converted? It's so interesting to see this because we talked about this years ago and it was, no, you can't do that, it's not possible. And then Diamond Place actually did it with theirs on one side, so the ramp goes up on the side. So I'm happy to see this. Would that be another consideration perhaps because of that concern about, we are in transition, we need to accommodate and mitigate the problem, but.
It's currently not an ordinance requirement, so it's optional for the developer, but that is something I think the Planning Commission could also consider in their assessment of the request.
Right, and it's also helpful for the developer to know ahead of time that that might be a consideration on the part of the Planning Commission.
Yep.
All right. Oh, that's helpful. Thank you.
That's the first one. Now the second one.
So thank you. The second item is a recommendation to to look, as many of you are aware, the city manager and staff, as well as the commissioners, have received a lot of inquiries from downtown residents. And so a goal of GR Forward, as well as our city strategic plan, is to increase the amount of offerings for residential programs. So for this item, we're recommending to sunset the current rate for residential parking and create a new program by combining two existing rates to simplify the programmatic offerings. And that the idea is that we would open up centralized residential parking available in the Pearl and Ionia parking garage. That's pretty central to a lot of the downtown residential, the older buildings that didn't have as much on-site parking available. And that the new rate would be equal to the regular monthly rate that monthly customers, plus night and weekends, which would give them 24/7 access to the facility. There are some minimal costs for adding an additional gate to separate where the parking is available for these residents within the facility. But this would also allow us to honor some waitlist requests. We have about between 30 and 40 residential waitlist requests that are currently pending out there. And it allows us to become more of a vibrant downtown. And we targeted this facility because we do have some underutilized visitor spaces in it. So this allows us to not negatively impact the other demands we have for other parking offerings within the system. So this is a way for us to be able to accommodate the demand that we have growing for downtown residential parking and centralize it and try this out and see if this is able to meet the growing demand that we have.
Good. Commissioners, questions about this? I will say I appreciate your work on this because I've heard about this quite a bit. And, you know, I've said repeatedly that if we're really going to meet the goals related to increasing the number of people living downtown to 10,000, we have to make sure that we're working in partnership with parking and DGRI to make sure that people, if they do have a vehicle, they have a place to park if they want to buy a condo or live downtown. So, thank you.
So we do have a schedule proposed for this, so we've introduced these two items today. And comments we could take as part of the budget hearing that's going to happen on May 14th. And then we propose to bring these forward for your consideration on May 21 with the rest of the budget items. All right, so next we'd like to move into the vital streets portion of mobility. And for that, Assistant City Engineer Rick DeVries, who needs no introduction, will go forward.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners, City Manager Washington. Especially thank you to our citizens for approving the Vital Streets program. It's really been great. For FY2020, the recommended investment would result in work on 31 miles of streets and $13.2 million in new investment. We will continue with preventative maintenance, the rehabilitation, and the reconstruction, primarily on our federal aid urban streets and our local streets as well. But please recall that with our asset management strategy, we started by preserving the fair streets first. So as we go along in the program, we will be doing more and more reconstruction, which is quite a bit more expensive than rehab or preventative maintenance, and so that will result in maybe less mileage each year. The $13.2 million in investment will leverage $6.9 million in federal grants, as well as investment by others.
Rick, does that include the additional funds that were allocated in last year's budget, state budget? I mean, I know it wasn't significant, but there was a little bit of bump at the end of the year last year.
It does, and there was a call in the original Sustainable Streets Task Force report that there'd be $6 million in additional state dollars. We've just reached that amount, and so going forward from there, there's a sharing of the delta dollars between Vital Streets, Street Capital Fund, as well as operations.
Okay, thank you.
The condition of our streets has improved dramatically since we began the Vital Streets program in 2014. In 2013, the Sustainable Streets Task Force recommendation included the information on the top half of this slide. Our streets were 60% poor, with a possibility of 87% poor by now if there was no new investment. The bottom half shows our progress. We reversed that trend and are now back to a condition not seen since 2002. Our goal is to reach 70% good and fair by the end of fiscal year 2030. We're at 60% good and fair right now for our entire 600-mile street system. The major street segment of our system, federal aid urban and non-federal aid urban, are at 79% good and fair right now. Here are a few of the projects that are planned for FY 2020. As I said, many of these leverage federal grants and include coordination with water, sewer, storm, and other investors to maximize the value of the investment and value to neighborhoods and the business districts. Projects are selected using factors like asset management, balance and distribution, demographic need, and connectivity opportunity by precinct, neighborhoods of focus, as well as investment by others. The fund statements and project information can be found on 132 through 148 of the fiscal plan. Among other factors that we consider for where investment occurs, the investment guidelines require that balance and distribution is considered. As I've said before, this is a journey, and we do almost annual course corrections to get that balance. The top left pie chart is where we believe we'll end up at the end of this current fiscal year. Our next fiscal year will see an increase in funding of the second ward projects with a balance of all wards by fiscal year 2024. The goal of Vital Streets for sidewalks is to inspect and repair all sidewalks within the 15-year program. After approval of the ballot question, as you recall, the number of public repair requests increased significantly, slowing the systematic inspection and repair. The public requests have slowed, and in FY 2020, the systematic program will ramp up to meet our 15-year goal. This is the planned investment for sidewalks for FY 2020. We're recommending $900,000 in systematic repairs, which also includes another $55,000 in ADA ramps in those areas where we're working. We still expect significant amount of public requests, so we budgeted $450,000 for that work. We also plan to have a separate ADA ramp contract. We have completed to date about 3,500 ADA ramp upgrades during the program, and that's both with the Vital Streets projects as well as the sidewalk program. Connectivity is critical to improve the walkability of our community. This year, we will leverage a federal grant to complete the sidewalk on Plainfield Avenue from I-96 to the north city limits.
Thank you, Mr. DeVries and Mr. Naramore. So that concludes the presentation regarding mobility, and be happy to take questions.
All right.
Or, City Manager, you want to take a pause here before we take questions?
Before we do that, Mayor, if I just could, again, I want to thank all our presenters this morning, Ms. Wood and Mr. DeVries, but I do want to especially thank Mr. Naramore for being very, very thoughtful about our parking challenges and solutions. And as he mentioned, we were in implementation mode on a lot of things early, and the engagement process was something we wanted to improve upon, and I think he's done exactly that. Him and the team, Eric and Kara, have helped to improve what you've seen today. So I want to acknowledge that before you begin your questions.
Thank you. I will add my thanks, because I feel like for all of us, parking and mobility has been a challenge in our city, and Josh has taken the lead on working through a number of challenges, both downtown and in our neighborhoods, as many of us know. And I know all of you and myself, we call on Josh to jump in and help fix issues and respond to complaints and find solutions, and he's always willing to step up and be at the table and think creatively and innovatively. So we're glad to have him here, and really appreciate your work, and I would say your extra hours and time and energy that you put in. So thank you. Commissioners, questions? Commissioner?
Yes, first of all, I want to thank all of you for all this work, too. Rick, you are just amazing at answering our questions whenever residents have them, and I really appreciate that. They want to know when our street's going to be repaired, and initially it was tough because everybody wanted to see the worst streets repaired, even though we have an asset management plan. But I just want to ask if you can invite me to a ribbon cutting when Knapp Street's done. I bet you want to go too, Mayor and Commissioner.
I'll be there as well.
We hear about Knapp Street so often. But Josh, yes, thanks. You've been great too. Parking, as you often say, is very personal, and we have certainly all experienced that in terms of our constituent calls. I think another person I want to note that who's been so helpful through our conversations is Christine Helms-Miletic, who's not here today, but as she has staffed uptown, she has helped us navigate a lot of issues in that area, so I appreciate her. Could you answer this, though, because I know it will come up, and I really appreciate the work you've done to accommodate some of the downtown residents. Can you talk about how the way it's financed does prohibit purchase of spots? The way that our parking lots are financed prohibits the actual purchase of spots, because that has been a question that's come up.
Yes, particularly as it relates to downtown parking, we historically have used the majority of non-tax bond revenue to pay for the construction of through the building authority bonds. So as part of that, we always have to be very mindful of how much private use, or it has to be available for public parking as much as possible. So that makes it very difficult, and so historically we have not entertained that. And also it makes it very difficult for you to manage facilities moving forward if we choose to do something else or bring in different mixes of uses within to buildings themselves. But that is what we've spent a lot of time researching with the city attorney's office in my tenure here, is to make sure that we dot all the i's and cross the t's, the complexities of the way we financed a lot of those facilities, to make sure we're honoring them until they're fully paid off. An example is the Pearl and Ionia facility. It's fully paid for. It was constructed long enough ago that there is no outstanding financing on it. So,
thank you.
Thanks. And Commissioner Kelly, thank you for serving on the Mobile GR Commission. I know you are deeply involved in a lot of these conversations. Other questions, commissioners? All right, I'll turn it back to our city manager. I don't know if you want to take a break now or get started and then take a break. Do you have a preference?
I think we can, unless the commission needs a break, we can proceed and get through the public safety presentation. I was waiting on getting more information from staff, and I think it will probably be another 30 minutes or so before we get another update.
All right. So, well, why don't we just take then a quick 3-minute break if you have to use the restroom or fill up your coffee, and that will give time to also give staff an opportunity to clear out, and the staff who are joining us to come forward and get prepared. So let's start back in here at 10:15. I'll turn it over to our city manager to get us started today. Not today, to get us back started, I should say. Restarted. That's right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. See, I think you have mine. Thank you, Mayor. We will, what I will ask, because I know there's going to be a lot of discussion potentially, and if you could hold your questions till the end, and we can get through the materials. We have our fire chief, Chief Lehman, and our interim police chief Kittle also joining us for this discussion today as we review the investments in our safe community, which is about $3 million. The majority of it is in the general fund. And there are some adds, but as you know, public safety is the majority of the cost in our general fund budget. We'll also talk about some of the new capital investments of over $4 million. So I want to begin with a conversation around community-oriented policing, and I continue to be grateful to the men and women in the police department who do so much to keep our community safe. And I've had a chance to meet with many of them and ride out with some of them, see them in action in terms of the policing efforts that are needed with some of our major events in our community. And I've also had a chance to be part of community conversations where some of the challenges that we've been faced with around some of the less than desired outcomes from the reportings from media that has resulted in a lack of distrust among some of our community. And so what we wanted to do is to invest in this budget and do things that will help us improve our community-oriented policing efforts. And based on the deployment study, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. There is a recommendation of adding three civilians with the hopes that the police chief will be both interim and the upcoming newly hired police chief will be able to make some decisions about redeploying personnel that will be able to be free to do policing matters and not just administrative or technical jobs. Again, this budget also adds 2 police officers that will allow, with the redeployed officers, to create that second shift of community policing, which right now does not exist in the evenings. It's only 8 to 5 or whatever the patrol hours are during the shift hours are during the day. So this would help to create a second shift during the work week. I do understand that community policing is not the responsibility of one unit, is a culture of the entire department. And we are going to continue to work towards that effort. But I think this is a step in the right direction until we can realize the type of community policing that we want pervasive through the department. The chief has also indicated the need to make sure that he staffs appropriately, and there's an anticipation of a higher than normal number of retirements, and so with that, there's funding in the budget for 2 police classes, and I don't think we highlighted this before, but he's also increasing the number of interns in the department by 5. That will help in terms of talent pipeline preparation and beginning to recruit and hopefully in even efforts to diversify the workforce by using the intern program. And with that, there's also the associated equipment for the new officers. And again, I continue to hope that we can do all efforts that are non-traditional to help reduce violence, and there's funding in the budget for a violence reduction program of about $75,000 and the crisis intervention behavioral health specialists that will be available for both community as officers are responding to critical incidents as a second responder, if you will, but also available to the police officers to assist in their mental health and well-being, particularly whenever they have experienced post-traumatic events and may need some support that's more, for lack of a better term, clinical than peer support, or more immediate than what they would get if they were having to schedule an appointment with a clinician. There's also funding for the emergency preparedness manager that will be housed in the fire department. We talked a little bit about that on the 23rd, and additional funding for safety in various other ways, to include our improving our markings in terms of making sure that we protect the safeties of pedestrians in the right-of-way, and as well as we've had extensive conversation about the subsidy that's needed for the district court, about $400,000. I think this year is the increased subsidy primarily due to leasing costs, as well as the addition of 2 crime analysts, and I think this is consistent with the deployment study, to help in solving some of the technical and administrative resources that the detectives and other people in the department need in terms of support. And lastly, a senior position in executive office to assist with our department's community relations and accountability, and help build some bridges between community, as well as with our it's assisting the process of appeals even to the CRC. Next slide. So I wanted to give this as context, just as some of the data that help to inform, not determine, but help to inform some of the recommendations, and just remind you of the various studies that has been commissioned shortly after my arrival. So when you look at the Hiller-Heinz deployment study, the recommendation I highlighted there, 1.5, talked about aligning support staff in areas that will help to inform the department's decision-making and implementation of crime strategies and other administrative and operational needs. That's consistent with the 3 civilian positions, as well as the 2 crime analysts, which recommendation 1.9 specifically recommended the crime analyst unit. And there was also another recommendation, I didn't highlight that, that recommended support for the records unit as well. 1.13 spoke about a staffing plan that accounts for the upcoming gaps in additional staff, and to do things to anticipate retirements. And so that's part of the reason you'll see the recommendation in the budget about having 2 classes for those types of issues in attrition that could facilitate that type of turnover. Looking at the 21st Century Community Policing Assessment and the recommendations that came from the Police Policy and Procedure Task Force, I just highlighted a couple of things from the assessment recommendation. By 21CP recommended that we have a collaborative process to adopt a best practice community oversight model to ensure residents have voice in all aspects of policing, to include the strategies for fighting crime, training, accountability, and technology. And so that position in the executive office will work with the police department and the community to also help in that type of collaborative way in terms of having the best oversight model, as well as the recommendation for greater community involvement in police policy development, training, and oversight. So that position will be able to help in that as well. 6.1 talked about the need for the city and the police department to continue its recruitment outreach with focus groups, and I think the chief's feedback was right now, and there are certainly other things we can do, but right now the intern program continues to help in our recruitment efforts. I think departments across the country are challenged with making sure that not only they can recruit talent, but also making sure they can recruit diverse talent, and I think that continues to help. There'll be obvious other things that we can do to improve upon that, and 6.2 undergirds the need to continue the intern program as well, and this was recommended by the Police Policies and Procedure Task Force. And then finally, the recommendation about evidence-based crime reduction strategies. And so I alluded to that earlier about with the $75,000. That's a portion of some things that could be done to contribute to that, but that budget recommendation aligns with the recommendation from the assessment. And real briefly, these are some of the capital investments that are in the proposed fiscal plan. You'll see that there are several investments that are going to improve our signal modernization effort that will make, we have some, I think, projects to finish the installation at Michigan and Banton to add additional traffic engineering and traffic capital replacement for several other intersections. There's other projects that call for traffic calming devices, as well as the Division Avenue Fire Station. Let me come back to that one. On the 911 dispatch capability, and I wanted to emphasize again that our intent is to improve our ability to have a backup for the primary system and improve the system to 800 megahertz. But we are still having those policy discussions around how it will be deployed and whether or not encryption would be the best way to do that. I know that there are several other agencies that's part of the conversation, but that is not just a City of Grand Rapids discussion. The fire chief has indicated as well, not only this year, but in previous years, the need to have additional capacity in terms of fire response and the need to have a Division Avenue Fire Station. We have funding in the budget for that capital improvement. That is pre-development costs for some of the design and architectural services that are needed for that station to replace the vintage 1925 fire station that is currently on Division. We have done work and thought about what it would cost if we were not to build a station, and the estimates that we have preliminarily is that it would be approximately 70 to 80% of the cost of new construction to modernize the current station. And the chief could speak more to that as well. And also you have some equipment in the budget for police vehicles, as well as we begin to expand our development of the river and the fire department, and the fact that we're going to be activating the river. We're going to have a lot of people in it. The fire department needs to be prepared for its rescue and response efforts. And so additional equipment is needed for, I had a chance to visit with the chief and the men and women at the Bridge Street Fire Station and see some of the apparatus that they currently have, and clearly it's there's an opportunity to improve the apparatus that's needed when we have more people in the river. Okay, with that, I will pause and see what questions you might have from me or the chiefs.
All right. My colleagues. Commissioners, questions or comments?
Let me also add, I just was informed this morning that a conversation is taking place now, I think by the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, regarding their review, for lack of a better term, investigation into the practices of the police department. And my hopes were that the efforts that we are taking in response to the 21st Century CP study and what you see in the budget to improve community policing, as well as taking seriously the recommendations for oversight internally, was a signal to them to indicate that we are taking very seriously the feedback that we've gotten from consultants and community. At this point, I'm not aware of what the announcement, the formal announcement, but I did want the commission to know that I believe that conversation started around 10 o'clock, and it is not streamed as I understand it.
So we'll hear hopefully soon what their findings and plans are. Okay.
We'll find out what their intent is, as far as if there's going to be an investigation. And we've not received anything formally from them.
Okay, all right, thank you. Commissioner Kelly, question?
Well, I just wanted to make a comment on recommendation 6.1. The city and GRPD continue its recruitment outreach efforts with a specific focus on minority recruitment and retention. I happened to channel Abigail Adams as I was listening to that. Don't forget the ladies. So we are 51%, and I would just encourage you to really make an effort to hire more females in the department as well.
If you've not seen it, we do have a women's recruiting summit coming up on May 18th, specifically for female candidates.
Thank you. That's
Yep.
excellent, Chief.
And I think that's the first time ever. Is that correct, Chief?
That is correct.
Great.
Under Chief Kittle's leadership.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I did see that. I do think so one, I'll just say thank you, City Manager, for this overview. I do think it brings together and aligns a lot of the recommendations as well as the goals set out in the strategic plan, and I really appreciate that. But I do think maybe we can take an opportunity. I know the department has been doing a lot around whether it's, I saw the recruitment for women. I know the city manager and I both were able to stop by. The outreach we're doing to help people understand the agility tests. I know you're kicking off the Youth on Base program. Chief, do you want to highlight some of the other things you're doing in the department that we'll likely see over the next couple of months as you continue to work to improve community and police relations as well?
Sure. The Youth Police Academy is another program that will continue. We'll have 2 sessions of that this summer. Our Police Explorer program continues. We are seeing some individuals now that have gone through the Youth Police Academy, the Police Explorer program, and now has been interns and then also entered into our sworn forces. So that has been successful. It's a slow process, but it is working. And then our police intern program, as the city manager mentioned, we are looking to increase that by 5. That has been proven to be a successful program for both minorities and females. I can tell you of our 35 right now, 40% are minority and 56% are female in the intern ranks.
Thanks, Chief. Commissioner O'Connor?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I just want to touch on there's an explicit add of 2 officers here, discussion of a 5-person evening shift for community policing services. So for the last, I've been here at this table for 4 years now. So we've asked for 10 community police officers each of the last 3 years. And so there's clearly an effort to try to realign some resources to support an evening shift. A 5-person evening shift does not cover all of our community policing service areas, if I'm correct. The idea that, I had a weekly or my monthly meeting yesterday with the leadership from all of our neighborhood associations in the First Ward, and every meeting I go to, they've continued to ask and support their community police officer and wanting to have additional community policing resources for nights and weekends. Regardless of what the study said, they asked for that every week for the past 3.5 years that I've been at this table. We have one neighborhood association who's had a community police officer. Their community officer has been on disability or out for a medical thing for quite a while. They've had no communication about when and if that person will return or how that person will return. So we have a very significant neighborhood on the southeast side of the first ward that does not have an officer, and they have no idea who to communicate. You know, the captain has been trying to fill in, and a regular officer, but we clearly don't have that. And I just don't see how we're, with the adding of 2 officers and the reassignment of some other, that we actually accomplish the goal. We're still leaving neighborhoods that, you know, we're going to pick some winners and losers here about what neighborhoods get a evening officer, when that officer will serve, may or may not be there. You know, it's clear every time, you know, I know all my community officers in the first ward, and, you know, I go downtown and there's an event at DeVos Place, and, you know, we have to put them on overtime, and who's standing out there directing traffic? My community police officer. And so it continuing down this path of, we're not really, like, there's not a full faith effort to really engender community policing in this community. Yes, I know every officer should act as a community police officer, but, you know, we're not putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to this. And so I just, you know, I appreciate the efforts to realign and try to civilianize some things and to do some things creatively, but, you know, adding two folks doesn't address the concern.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let me ask the chief, can you, I know that there still would be much needed work to operationalize the assignment, but can you just give some thought on how you might utilize those resources and how would we experience community policing with your redeployment?
So if we're able to get what's proposed, and we can transition 5 officers to an evening shift, and we're still looking at what hours that might be, we're probably looking at a 4 to 2, 5 to 3, something in that area. It would allow us to at least put 1 in each service area. We do have 5 service areas. Is that enough? No, I don't think it's enough. One other thing we are looking at is we do have some vacancies right now in our day shift community policing specialists, and I've kind of been holding off on filling those as we consider whether or not we can actually rotate some of those positions to night shift as well to increase those numbers to potentially a 7 or 8. Again, not quite enough, but it's certainly a start.
Which is something Commissioner Lanier has recommended. Well, and I'll add that, you know, I do think the deployment study, and I appreciate what you said, Commissioner, that some people don't agree with the deployment study. I personally found it very helpful, and it also highlighted that there are other needs within the department, and I'm glad to see that we have some crime analysts added to the detective unit. I personally have heard that the detective unit has been struggling for a number of years, and that had never been brought to our attention during the budget process. So I'm glad that that's included in this budget, as well as the other positions that really help create more of a holistic approach, as well as meet the needs around community input and oversight, which is something that we've heard now multiple times over the last couple of years. It's not perfect, we know that, but I do believe that as we're in this interim period, as we seek a new police chief, it gets us through this short-term change and adjustment until the new chief can come in and do their own assessment of the department and make some decisions. And I anticipate that the new chief will come forward after they get some experience behind them with some additional recommended changes. So, Commissioner Kelly, did you have a comment?
Well, I just wanted to thank you, too. I get regular, we all do, we get regular updates from Steve Guitar, which we appreciate. That I know I've been pushing out on social media, for example, the On-Base program that's starting, and you're recruiting people. Very much appreciate all the work that you've done and the short time that you've been here, Chief, and continue to look forward to this. I missed the note about the female recruitment. Sorry about that, but I'm happy to hear about that as well. We certainly had some great relationships with some of the women that worked in our ward, so I just reflect back on that, particularly Pam Carrier. I don't know how flexible you can be under the contract, but I do know that some departments have also used flexible hours for their community policing units, so that if there is a night meeting or a morning meeting, that they have a little bit of that opportunity to pick and choose a bit within the hours that they are assigned to work. So it might be something to consider as well, because I hear that concern, and sometimes it's just a rare event, but it's an important event that an officer might wish to attend.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Commissioner Lanier?
Yeah, thanks for the highlights, City Manager. And I just have one quick question about the study. There was well, actually, I have 2 questions. One of them was, There had been some conversation about the parking citations, and I didn't really see that specifically pointed out in this, so I'm just curious to know if it's too soon to try and make that type of a change with this budget, being this far underway. And then the other one is, I think Commissioner O'Connor mentioned it, about officers and overtime directing traffic. And that's been a question that I've had since before the study, just trying to figure out, I know we had some conversations about Michigan law requires officers to do that work. But we also know that at schools, others can be in the street directing traffic across the street. So just trying to figure out a way to, whatever we can delegate to civilians, maybe we could do that so that sworn officers can do the work that only they can do.
Right. Those are excellent questions. And when the deployment study, these recommendations are not all the recommendations to implement. So we've kind of prioritized what we thought we could address this year, what could be resourced directly in the police department. Having civilians participate in the parking enforcement is a conversation we have started in both with Director Niramore and Chief Kittle, as well as the law department. And there's two things. One, I think there currently exists a voluntary citizen component to parking enforcement that we are working to improve that capability to allow more volunteers to help enforce parking, and I'll let the chief expound on that a little bit. But the second part is I do think there could be some integration between mobile GR and the police department, because if you take, for instance, during the recent polar vortex, I doubt we would be able to call volunteers out to tell them come write some parking tickets for odd and even. But during that vortex, our mobile GR staff wasn't fully utilized because their enforcement has been primarily in the downtown areas and in areas where we have city assets for parking. So, but I will tell you, if we deploy Mr. Naramore and his group to parking enforcement, there will be an uptick in parking enforcement. They will do that because that's their sole job, where the officers are doing it in addition to the many other duties that they're responsible for doing. And so they have a tremendous workload to balance. So the reason why I didn't bring that forward, because I wanted us to be very clear on our intent. And I'm sure Mr. Naramore and his staff will do a great job of parking enforcement, but we need to transition to that very intentionally. The other part, and you're right, on the crossing public events, and I'm the city attorney and police chief will have to help me with that, but I have inquired about that, and the response that I had been given is that it is a matter of state law, and if there is any other caveats to that, I would invite the chief or the city attorney to expound on that at this time. But Chief, you want to begin with the potential use of mobile GR and other civilians on parking enforcement, then we'll get to the second question.
Sure. So we do have a volunteer program right now that writes parking citations, and that's cut out in the ordinance for them to do that. We are preparing an amendment to bring to you for an ordinance change with legal in regards to expanding what they are able to write. It's another 5 or 6 different violations that would be very helpful. And we are having conversations with Mobile GR in regards to using their personnel as well to take that responsibility away from police officers. In regards to the traffic crossing, it is my understanding it is state law. There has to be a police officer in the roadway. There is a caveat for crossing guards, trained crossing guards only.
And I want to clarify. This will be to supplement, so the officers will still have the ability and can still be expected, but we won't primarily depend on sworn officers to enforce parking if we include mobile GR in that effort.
I have a follow-up question then to your second answer, and that's just in regards to what Commissioner Lanier said, and your experience at the school is helpful here. So help me understand how trained crossing guards can be used for schools but not other events, or can they? So could if you're a trained crossing guard, I think the school uses a company that trains folks, or they oversee them. So is that for any crossing?
So that company is actually used, the police department is responsible for crossing guards. So that is the company we actually use to train the crossing guards, and they assign them, and that's billed to us. So that's part of our budget. I am not aware that they are able to work for other things non-school related, but we can check into that.
Please. And then, Chief, if you could follow up too on the earlier conversation about the volunteer for the parking citation. So with those changes to the ordinance, with adding the other, I don't know how many you said, but the other categories, then do you see that freeing up officers then so that additional officers would be staffed at a time when they wouldn't otherwise write citations? I'm just trying to understand,
Sure.
as a result of that, how do you see it impacting?
I see it as
policing?
providing officers more time to do other duties. Right
Okay.
now, they're pulled away. They get called on actual parking complaints now. So we would now kind of redirect those calls to either Mobile GR or to our senior volunteer. I'm sorry, they're no longer senior volunteers, it's our volunteer program.
Sure, okay, I see. Thank you.
Okay.
And then when can we get a response back on the trained crossing guard question before the adoption of the budget? I think that's a really critical piece because we have a growing entertainment, I don't know what the right word is, but there's things happening in the community all the time now, especially downtown. And so the more that entertainment grows, I think the more we have officers doing the crossing work. And if there's a way to reduce that, I'm looking at it for their own safety, in terms of the number of overtime hours. And I know sometimes people prefer that, and then other times, it can become overwhelming to be required to work overtime too frequently. So just,
Yeah, I think we would want to get a formal legal analysis on that question.
great, thank you.
And I would be interested to hear what other cities are doing. I have to imagine that there's other options, but I don't know. It's something to look into. But I hear what Commissioner Connor says, when you get a complaint that your community police officer isn't in the neighborhood because they're directing traffic at a crosswalk downtown, that can be very frustrating.
A good question. We'll have an answer at next work session. Okay, let me pause and see if Chief Lehman, is there anything you would like to add on behalf of the fire department?
Happy there's no questions?
He's happy there's no questions. You want to say that in the mic, Chief?
Happy that there's no questions? No, I think that these are, the things that we have in this budget are very prudent and necessary, and I appreciate your support.
Okay, so now that you said that.
There's a question.
Commissioner Kelly.
At some point, I'm sure that this will come to us anyway, but that 70 to 80% of the cost for new construction, we'd certainly like to see numbers at some point and help.
Sure.
Help you consider that and take your
Yep,
advice, of
we
course.
did have our architect go ahead and draft a proposal on that, and that's where those came from.
Thanks.
Okay.
I do have just one question too. I'm curious to know, so last budget, so what's good about this process is that it's kind of straight to the point and it's talking about the future. In the past, we've had a few updates on like prior year's budget, changes and the outcomes of those changes. And so one in particular I'm curious to know is an update on like the usage of the drones. And I do recall kind of hearing, I don't remember was it during polar vortex or something where someone was using them, but I'm just curious to know.
Look at ice jams on the river.
Yeah, so just curious to know how that's going, is there additional support needed there, or did we ask for too much, or?
I would say that program is going very well. It's doing much better than what I even would have anticipated it. They are now on frontline deployment on our vehicles, and so we don't have the need to necessarily call specially to have it brought to the scene. They're pre-deployed on our vehicles so that we can just assemble the operators. We're finding a lot more uses around special teams, hazardous materials, water rescue in particular. I can tell you that the FLIR imaging has helped us on several evenings when we've been out on the river looking for somebody, or even just keeping track of our own rescuers, that has given us a dynamic that we've never experienced before. So that, along with the natural disaster component, where we have that to be able to look at water and as well as ice buildup and potential impacts, it drastically reduces the number of man-hours it takes to survey a large scene.
Wow.
And so it's been very, very positive.
Good, glad to hear that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Any other? And maybe, Chief, I should ask you the same question I asked Chief Kittle. I know the fire department is doing a lot of great work. Do you want to highlight any of the other initiatives that you're taking on or the work that you're doing?
So in addition, we do have a Summer Youth Academy that is scheduled, and we have posters out right now. That's been in the third year now and growing. But we also this year did an extreme amount of work at recruitment and looking at changing how we do it in many different areas, pushing it out into the community. And so I think that's one of the things I'd like to highlight, is that we're getting to the point where that class is going through their physical agilities now, and we'll have that pool assembled and be doing interviews in preparation for an academy class that should start in August.
That's great. And you're still doing smoke alarm program and carbon monoxide?
That program continues to lead the nation. We're looking at a next trigger of 10,000 homes, rooftops within the city of Grand Rapids, and that should happen by the end of this week, I anticipate. And we'll be doing another press release on that. But that program continues to be a forerunner in the country.
And you have an ISO rating of 1, the only in the state.
That's correct.
Which I keep touting all over when I'm out with my fellow mayors. I remind them that we have the best fire department in the state of Michigan. So,
Thank you for that.
yeah. Commissioners, any other questions?
I just want to express my appreciation to City Manager Washington and the staff. You took a lot of streams of input, including 7 very strong ones from up here, and tried to integrate them, and I appreciate the respect that was paid to each of those sources of information.
Well said. Commissioner Jones, any comments? All right. City Manager?
Yes, one more update here. So as we were preparing the budget, when we did the budget kickoff on the 23rd, we used the best information we had at the time. And for the purposes of our pension plan, the assumptions that we're using this budget was consistent with the actuarial study that was as of December 31st, 2017. We have been recently informed of the actuarial, that there will be a completed actuarial study as of December 31st, 2018. Only last week, I believe, is when it came to my attention. And we've been trying to way through the results of that study even as recent as today. The formal board meeting is not until the 15th, May 15th. Our next session is on the 14th. What we preliminarily know is that the study from 2018, some of the assumptions on the performance and returns have been less than what was projected. As you recall, in 2018, there was a market downturn. Now, the market has significantly rebounded since then, rebounded and recovered almost fully, but the report does not reflect that return. And so our practice has been, we've had a couple things. Our practice has been to use the data from the most recent actuarial evaluation, which projects a more, I won't say negative, but it has some significant consequences financially if we do that. And so right now we're going through that. We hope to have a more informed briefing on the 14th on those results. Just don't want to get too far ahead of the actual pension board's conversation, but there's a couple things I want to have in addition, just talking about the 2017 report versus 2018 report. Part of our strategic plan is to have financial sustainability and increase our bond ratings. We hear the county does a great job of having AAA bond ratings. I see no reason why we should not aspire to. No. No. Let me. I think there are some things that we can do that won't cost us $1 more, and that is to improve our relationship with the rating agencies. And the county invests in relationships. They take trips to New York to make sure that the agencies understand not just historically what's on the report, but what they can't see is what's in the future. They can't, if all we're doing is taking data from 2017 and running that out 5 years, that's what they see on paper. But what's in the future in 2022 is something very creatively that's going to happen on the river. What's in the future, the marijuana industry is not on that reporting the income that's going to happen here. And so just as other corporations have their investor meetings and they try to get the markets to understand not only what's happening now, but what's happening in the future. I think those kind of conversations and deliberate relationships with the rating agencies will help them understand about Grand Rapids, because our future is just as intertwined as the county's future. Even more so. Now, our financial condition on some of our plans may be a little bit differently. We don't have 100% funding in OPEB, but not many other employers do, and they have AA plus or AAA bond ratings.
Right.
I came from a place that didn't have nearly as much funding in OPEB, and we have pretty good bond ratings. So there's a lot of other factors. It's not all cost related, but it is something I think we can do. But at the same time, I think this conversation around our pension plan, which is a very good plan and is very well funded. It's, I think, currently 80% funded. Is that correct for the police and fire?
82%.
82. So I want to be very deliberate in that conversation, and then we may have to pivot on a couple of things in terms of not if we do it, just it may be a matter of when. So it may be a two-step process for some of these initiatives, that we do some at the beginning of the year and perhaps do some mid-year, and we'd have to go through a prioritization. But again, it needs to be more informed about by the pension plan discussion, and we do have a representative from this commission on the board, Commissioner Moody, who's unable to be with us today. I want to also, again, share my what you see as a result of very deliberate strategy, and I want to share, again, my appreciation for our sustainability and performance manager, Alice Sutter, for her work and make sure we stay aligned. And I heard the comment earlier about, there are some things we have maybe talked about in the budget, and, a year, 2 years later, there's been conversation, whatever happened to what we talked to. I sense those days are long over for a couple of reasons. That's not my intention, but secondly, we have some controls in place, and that performance management office is one of them, to make sure that we are very deliberate in reporting internally every quarter on where we are based on the commitments that we've made. So I want to thank her for the discussion. Thank you for your feedback today, and again, thank all the budget team, the staff in the back for all of their hard work. And so with that,
Commissioner Kelly has a question. I'll ask one more time for questions. I am going to add, though, and affirm what the city manager said, in that I think we can learn a thing or two from our county partners in regards to bond rating, as well as a few other things that city manager and I have been meeting with the county, and I think there are some valuable lessons we can learn from them. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And then Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, I too want to underscore my thanks to the city manager and to staff for the great listening that you did, and the process was wonderful, and I think it's clear, and we're also hearing from community leaders who've looked at the strategic plan and are happy to be able to read it quite easily, and it's understandable. And of course, the metrics matter a great deal, and we'll all be happy to get the reports back. The other thing I wanted to mention is I appreciate your explanation of why it might be wise for us to advocate with those who evaluate us in terms of bond rating, and that would, I think, pay for itself in terms of better interest rates, as I understand it. So the payback should be well worth the effort to build that relationship. So thank you for that explanation.
Yeah, thank you. All right. And with that, I think we are going to go ahead and adjourn. And then, City Manager, if you can brief us or update us on what you hear in relation to the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.